You are watching a most unusual edition of the mother of all talk shows. Unusual for several reasons. First of all, our American viewers and listeners are just joining us now because of the change of clocks. They missed the first hour of the show, but mind you, so did I. I was going to talk about the nightmare journey, which included false imprisonment on a train with no air, no water, and the doors locked, sitting in Northampton station with people beginning to, well, faint was the least of it. We had a pregnant woman. We had several people who seemed to be suffering from claustrophobic anxiety. It was baking hot, and there we were looking through a locked window at a railway station which was full of fresh air, but they would not let us out, even though we were 3.5 hours late on our journey. I was going to talk about the inadequacies, the negligence, the total bankrupt failure of Arriva West Coast trains, but I'll leave that till next week when I want to have a proper deep dive into the transport situation in this country. We have the farcical situation where we have the big COP environmental conference going on in Glasgow, and the entire British press corps was unable to get there because of, water on the line or trees bringing down overhead power cables, because, of course, rain on the 31st of October came as a complete surprise to Britain's railway companies. I was going to talk about it at length tonight, but breaking news means that it would not be seemly to do so. There is a report of a train crash with fire engines and ambulances racing to the scene near Andover, I think. I've no idea how serious a train crash it is, but out of respect to those caught up in a much more serious situation on the railway than the one I have just been through, I will leave that to breaking news, and we'll discuss Britain's trains next week. But I warn you, Arriva West Coast, Avanti West Coast, I keep mixing up the insurance company. Maybe I'm preparing my legal case against Avanti Trains. I warn you, Avanti Trains, I'm not going to go easy on you. I told you tonight that I was almost lost for words, but I won't be lost for words next Sunday. So the long and the short of all that was, I'm an hour late for my show also, and I really thank my colleagues in the studio for the emergency action that they had to take in interrupting normal programs. And of course, it goes without saying, I'm very grateful to the audience for sticking with us. We've been doing this a very long time. It's the first time that it has happened, and I hope that it is the last time. The interruption of normal programs, I hope, is not a harbinger of things to come. The Queen is poorly, maybe very poorly. They may be keeping from us just how poorly the 95-year-old monarch actually is. There are many, many reasons, hundreds of them, to wish a speedy and full recovery to Her Majesty the Queen. Long life to her. There are many hundreds of reasons. A woman who has given extraordinary public service, whether you're a monarchist or, like me, a Republican, one has to concede that. But one of the reasons why we must hope that Her Majesty manages to plough on is that if she does not, we will instantly, in an instant, have a new monarch. The increasingly insufferable Prince Charles will now become our king. And that's going to be bad news for Britain. Bad news, I think, for the royal family also in the system of monarchy. Bad news for politics in Britain, because as we saw again on the news today, this prince just can't keep his nose out of political matters. He's learned nothing in his long years, decades of playing second fiddle to his mother about staying out of controversial political matters. But when his interventions stink of hypocrisy to the extent of today's, I think it was yesterday, but reported today, when that hypocrisy reaches a level that one simply cannot stomach it, it makes you realize that if he becomes the king anytime soon, he's going to be simply insufferable. He's going to be unstoppable. Every political issue will be one that he seeks to seize the soapbox for, while expecting due deference and indeed a measure of reverence to his position in our unwillingness, perhaps, to respond as robustly as you can be sure we will respond here on the Mother of All talk shows. I refer, of course, to him wading in to the environmental debate. We've had many people on. We'll have many other people on. My apologies to Kevin McKenna that we weren't able to take him because of my absence in the first hour of the show. But we will next Sunday return to the subject of COP. But Prince Charles flew a private jet to Berlin to lecture the governments, elected governments for the most part, of the G20 about the need to give up so much of our normal way of life in the interests of stopping what they call the runaway train of global warming. He flew in a private jet to give that lecture, which he could have given, as I'm doing to you now, via Zoom from a hotel room, in my case in Milton Keynes, a kind of Paris of England. If you've never been there, don't try. But Milton Keynes is perfectly capable of hosting a Zoom speech, as I'm giving to you now. But Prince Charles flew in a private jet to Berlin. Then he flew back to London in a private jet from Berlin. Then he flew in another private jet to Glasgow, presumably to deliver exactly the same kind of homily. In fact, you can't move at Glasgow Airport for private jets. And of course, Air Force One, which must burn enough carbon to light Greenland in floodlights, arrived with President Biden's cavalcade in Scotland yesterday. Do you know how many cars are in Joe Biden's cavalcade at the COP conference? The COP conference to discuss global warming. It's a cavalcade of 80 vehicles, plus helicopters, plus Air Force One. These hypocrites, I don't know whether to laugh or cry at them crying into their cucumber smoothies about global warming. I know there's 80 cars because Joe Biden had a cavalcade of 80 cars in the Vatican, the smallest state in the world. There can be no room for any other vehicle other than President Biden's cavalcade. Mind you, the cavalcade was the least of the Pope's problems, reportedly, because Joe Biden overstayed his welcome with His Holiness. In fact, by double the time, Joe Biden extended his meeting with His Holiness, not just with a cockamamie joke, which couldn't have been funny even when Ronald Reagan uttered it in his senility, and sure was lost on the Argentine Pope when translated into Italian. It was a joke punchline of which was, how old would you be if you didn't know how old you were? You'd be 65, he said to the Pope, and I'd be 60. Side-splitting stuff, but nothing to what was going on afterwards in the Pope's lavatory. I don't want to get too gruesome, so let me just say that we now have it on the highest authority that the President of the United States had a toilet accident in the Vatican. Holy shit. It's almost too excruciating to adumbrate. But it's true. The leader of what they laughingly call the free world can't control his own bowels. He can't control what comes out of his mouth. And now we know he can't control what comes out of his ass. It must have been excruciating for His Holiness to be told that this toilet accident had occurred, especially if he then contemplated that this man's finger is on the nuclear button. This man is openly threatening China with war. This man is openly threatening Russia with war, Iran with war, Cuba with war, Venezuela with war, and he can't control his own bowel movements. For how long are the American people going to put up with this extreme humiliation? How long are the American people going to be required to suffer the ever-increasing embarrassment that is President Joe Biden? Now, of course, the hypocrites are all there. In rat-infested Glasgow, the worst-run city in the worst-run part of the United Kingdom, with little nationalist go-lighters running around promising native peoples everywhere their full support when they can't even collect their own dustbins. At midnight tonight, a dustbin strike starts in the city of Glasgow, a city that's deep in my heart, that I represented in Parliament for nearly 2 decades. Rats are the problem. The bin men just won't put up with them anymore. Not for the money they're getting paid. Why should they risk Wales disease, rats leaping out of overflowing bins? Oh no. And the railway workers, they're on strike too. So good luck if you make it to Scotland. Don't imagine you're going to be catching a train or that you're going to see a single bin being emptied. We'll talk at length next week. We'll get Kevin McKenna back, if he will, to deep dive into what happened at the Hypocrites Convention of the COP conference in Glasgow. Now, my next guest is a very, very good friend of mine, and he's here to talk about 2 important issues, not least because nobody else will talk about them. The first is the anniversary of the overthrow of the greatest of all African leaders, Patrice Lumumba, may God rest his soul. Patrice Lumumba, young, gifted and black, with vision, with a dedication to making what should be the richest country in Africa, the fairest and most just country in Africa, to make it a treasure trove for the peoples of Africa, to make it an armory for the liberation movements seeking to liberate what was then the rest of colonial occupied Africa. Patrice Lumumba was murdered by Belgian colonialism, by American colonialism, and not least at all, not least by British colonialism. And another matter. I wrote a piece for RT.com just the other day about the discovery under the release of government papers, which takes place every year, but 50 years too late, 30 years too late sometime, which showed the centrality of the British government in the overthrow of the Indonesian independence leader, President Sukarno, who made Indonesia big in the world, where now it is small, who founded the non-aligned movement, whose Bandung conference in that jewel of the Orient, the great city of Bandung, to which all the great figures of the non-aligned movement, of the progressive parts of the world attended in the 1950s. He was brutally overthrown, and wait for this number, as many as 3 million of his supporters were murdered in cold blood by the military led by General Suharto, who went on to spend decades in power as the greatest thief in the world, rivaling his African counterpart, Mobutu Sese Seko, who, of course, helped in the murder of Patrice Lumumba. The Killing Season is a book that my good wife, who is Indonesian, is reading right now by Jeffrey B. Robinson. The Killing Season is a book that moved her to tears on the train coming down this afternoon.